Good morning and welcome to the first meeting of the Health, Social Care and Sport Committee in 2026. I've received apologies from Elena Whittam, MSP, for this meeting. Carol Mochan, MSP, and Paul Sweeney, MSP, will be joining us remotely. The first item on our agenda is for the committee to agree to take item 5 in private. Do members agree to take this item in private? The second item on our agenda is consideration of two affirmative instruments, the Hydrolysis Scotland No. 1 regulations and the Hydrolysis Scotland No. 2 regulations. The purpose of these instruments is to enable hydrolysis to become available as an option for the disposal of human remains in Scotland and to establish the regulatory framework for hydrolysis facilities and their operators. The Delegated Powers and Law Reform Committee considered this instrument at its meeting on the 16th of December 2025 and made no recommendations in relation to these instruments. We will have an evidence session with the Minister for Public Health and Women's Health and supporting officials on the instruments, and once we have had any questions answered, we will proceed to a formal debate on the two motions. I welcome to the committee Jenny Minto, Minister for Public Health and Women's Health, Katrina McNeill, Team Leader, Burial and Cremation, and Marie Penman, Scottish Government Legal Directorate. And I invite the Minister to make a brief opening statement.
Thank you, Convener. I'm pleased to join the committee today to discuss the two sets of regulations relating to hydrolysis which are being made under the Burial and Cremation Scotland Act 2016. If you're content to pass these regulations, Scotland will be the first country in the UK to be able to offer hydrolysis as an alternative to burial or cremation. Hydrolysis has been gaining popularity and become more widely available in other countries. In Scotland, our intention is not to replace burial or cremation. Hydrolysis would be an additional choice for those who wish to consider it. There are two linked sets of regulations. The Hydrolysis Scotland No. 1 regulations apply to the provisions of the 2016 Act which relate to cremation to hydrolysis, subject to some key changes. Apologies, I'll read that again. Subject to some changes to key terms. They also make some textual amendments to the 2016 Act so that the Act reflects that there will be three options for the disposal of human remains going forward. The No. 1 regulations build on the legislative framework set out in the 2016 Act. The Hydrolysis Scotland No. 2 regulations are similar to the Cremation Scotland Regulations 2019. They set out the statutory framework for the management and operation of hydrolysis facilities, application forms to be used for hydrolysis, and the information to be recorded in registers of hydrolysis. The No. 2 regulations also set out clear requirements and procedures for the recovery, handling and return of hydrolysis powder. This will be the same as the ashes handling procedures following cremation set out in the Cremation Scotland Regulations 2019. The statutory requirements for the handling of powder will apply to hydrolysis authorities and funeral directors in line with the instructions from the applicant. As happens with cremation, these regulations will form one part of the wider regulatory oversight by a number of bodies. Those wishing to set up as a hydrolysis authority will need to obtain various consents in advance and will be subject to ongoing legislative requirements. Firstly, Scottish Water will need to grant trade effluent consent, as well as having an ongoing role overseeing and monitoring the liquid from hydrolysis facilities. Where the location of the facility means there is no access to the public, Drain, SEPA rather than Scottish Water will need to give consent and regulate discharge of the liquid into the environment. Secondly, a planning application will need to be submitted to the planning authority. This may be to adapt existing premises or to open a new facility. The planning application process will consider the location, visual impact, impact on local infrastructure such as access and transport links. In addition, the Scottish Government appointed inspectors of hydrolysis must approve a hydrolysis facility before the Hydrolysis Authority will be able to accept applications. This network of oversight will ensure the high standards that the public can expect with cremation will apply to hydrolysis. I look forward to answering any questions the committee may have.
Thank you very much, Minister. We do have a number of members who have questions, And I'll start with Brian Whittle.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning, Minister. I think my only questions here are around sodium hydroxide and potassium hydroxide, incredibly corrosive material, obviously, which is why it's being utilised. I think the concern would be is preventing it getting into the watercourse, because, as I said, it's incredibly corrosive, and we do have ongoing issues from time to time about material getting into the watercourse, and this would be particularly dangerous. So what sort of safeguards are we talking about putting in place here to ensure that these liquids don't make it into our watercourse?
I think that's a very important question, and one of the things we have to be absolutely clear that this is a safe process. The liquid, once the hydrolysis has taken place, the liquid is then removed and then cooled and then treated. And there is a full heat and rinse phase of the chamber. The liquid then is safely discharged into the water treatment network. There are no solids in the liquid, and only natural compounds like proteins, peptides, sugars and salts. And it is sterile, and there is no DNA being put into the water system. So this system, this explains why we need to ensure that Scottish Water and also SEPA are content with the way it goes, but that the system itself ensures that it's sterile water that goes out into the water system.
I think my main concern, I hadn't thought of that one, thank you for raising it, is more around the actual fluid itself. And as I said, sodium hydroxide, potassium hydroxide is incredibly corrosive liquid.
Stored within the facilities. Yeah. So it is neutralised by the fact that there are acids stored beside acids stored with it.
Thank you. Declaration of interest of Practising NHS GP. So I've received an email from Chris, a constituent, and he's raised a particular concern about prions. As you know, mad cow disease, CJD, is a disease which has occurred due to prions, and there is also some growing evidence around Parkinson's and prions. Now, given that they're incredibly tough, what confidence do you have that this method will destroy them, seeing as it is being released into the water supply rather than into the ground or burnt?
So, as I've just responded to Mr Whittle, there is a sterilisation process that is followed once the water cremation or the hydrolysis has taken place, and that is then free of toxins, DNA, proteins that will then be released into the system.
So we're clear that prions would be destroyed in this scenario?
The evidence that I have says they would be.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, and Happy New Year, Minister. What estimation has the Scottish Government made of the level of uptake, and what ongoing monitoring by SEPA is going to be done of those proteins, sugars and things released into the watercourse?
So uptake is a really good question, Ms Mackay, and Happy New Year to you as well. It's interesting, conversations that I've had with people have ranged from we'd be really interested in this to people that are less so. And I suppose that's just human nature, which is why it's important to underline that this is not replacing either burial or cremation. It is another option for people. We understand from conversations that I've had through the cross-party group within the Parliament that there are a number of funeral directors in industry that are interested in doing this. So if there is that interest, then I imagine that given that across the world, I think in South Africa and Australia, and also more recently in Southern Ireland, it being introduced, that there is a demand for it.
And on the ongoing monitoring, if we do have really big uptake of this, that's still quite a lot of proteins and sugars and things like that and salt going into the watercourse. How will SEPA monitor that and those particular watercourses as it's going into, and how involved are the ministers in checking that?
So all the so these regulations haven't required an environmental impact assessment because these are regulations. It would then be for either Scottish Water, local authorities or SEPA to determine how regularly they require that regulation from their perspective.
That's great. Thanks, Convener.
Emma Harper.
Thanks, Convener. Good morning to you, Minister. I was reading about this over the weekend about alkaline hydrolysis, and there are a number of countries that have already established it. America, Canada, I think over half the states in America have already established a process for using this method for dealing with remains of humans. So I'm interested to know what interest there's been in Scotland in terms of from local authorities or private businesses that are looking to establish this. Mm-hmm. I mean, what kind of appetite is there for this?
So, as I indicated to Gillian Mackay, from conversations I've had through the cross-party group within the Parliament, from an industry perspective, there is a lot of positivity around it. To date, I haven't had any indications from local authorities with the crematorium that they run that they may want to go down this route. But I think it's one of these things that if it's introduced and people decide they want to have this choice, and I think it's certainly recognised in the consultation that we did prior to these regulations, that of those that responded, 84% felt that this was this additional option should be given to people.
Okay.
The submission from Safe Scotland raised a couple of issues during their submission to committee. One of the questions they were asking was, has there been discussion with coroners regarding the Form 104 mentioning hydrolysis, and will their Form 6, which mentions cremation, be accepted for hydrolysis in Scotland?
Yes. So in Scotland, we require the certificate of death, as is the case in the other UK nations. We have been in conversation with the UK nations and the UK government about how we would move forward with this, and because UK government is looking at introducing similar regulations that we have across burials and cremations. And clearly, as I've said earlier, Scotland would be the first of the nations to give hydrolysis as an option. So when remains are repatriated to Scotland from other parts of the UK, and the disposal would be hydrolysis in Scotland, the Scottish Government's position is that consent from a coroner to cremate would be sufficient for Hydrolysis Authority to be able to proceed with hydrolysis, because both are final forms of disposal.
Thank you for that clarification. Minister, the other issue that they raised was the description of hydrolysis products as powder in the event of sending remains abroad, which will require consular permission from most countries, given that consular documents and requirements will only refer to cremation. So has there been any consultations or consideration given to these remains being described as powder? And are there some other legal substances with a similar composition, as there are, other substances with similar composition? Has the possibility of these being stopped at customs been considered?
So again, I think a very fair question, and it is a decision for countries out with Scotland as to what evidence they would require as to what is taken from Scotland into another country, whether that's ashes or the hydrolysis powder.
So I understand that it's obviously for other countries to decide what they allow to come across the borders. I suppose it's just about the consideration of that. You spoke earlier about hydrolysis has been used in other countries. Have there been any consultation or any evidence gathering about if there's been difficulties with relatives or friends taking remains to another part of the world that have been as a product of a hydrolysis?
I'll bring Katrina in, but it's quite interesting because this was exactly part of the conversation we were having prior to coming to the committee. And I think we were saying that very rarely have there been questions about this. But I'll let Katrina.
Yeah, I mean, not specific on that point, and it's not a point that's been raised with us as being a concern. And as it has become more widely available in other countries, you know, the research we did for the consultation paper and for these regulations, this wasn't an issue that came up. So we can certainly engage on this further to see if it is anticipated to be a problem, but it's not something we're aware of at this time.
Okay.
And I think as Katrina said, it is something that we will engage on. But again, we've talked about the importance of guidelines as well. So this might be something that's incorporated into that.
Mm-hmm. I think for committee, it's helpful to know that it is on your radar.
It's on our radar.
Given the circumstance that someone would be taking a friend or relative overseas, you would want that done as sensitively as possible. Thank you very much, Minister. We've reached the end of our questions. We'll now move to agenda item 3, which is the formal debate on the instruments on which we have just taken evidence. Can I remind the committee that officials may not speak in the debate? And Minister, can I ask you to move and speak to motions S6M 20005 and S6M 20006 lodged by Jenny Minto?
Thank you, Convener, and thank you, Committee, for your consideration of these regulations this morning. The regulations will enable hydrolysis to become available as an additional option for the people of Scotland while ensuring hydrolysis is subject to similar regulatory requirements that apply to cremation. The powers under the 2016 Act, along with the regulatory oversight from other organisations, will reassure the public that the deceased will be cared for with respect and dignity. In conclusion, I move the motion and invite the committee to approve these SSIs.
Thank you very much, Minister. I've had Sandesh Gohani wishes to speak.
Thank you, Convener. Declaration of Interest as a practising NHS GP. I feel that the most important thing here is that we have tie-up with other nations and that we have very clear boundaries, because the Minister said that we would be the first country in the UK to do this, and so long as we have a very smooth process across the UK, then I don't have any objections.
Thank you, Mr Gohani. Minister, is there anything that you would like to say in conclusion?
I've nothing to add.
The question is that motion S6M 20005 be approved. Are we all agreed? Yes. The question is that motion SM6 20006 be approved. Are we all agreed? Yes. Thank you. That concludes consideration of the instruments. Minister, you and your officials are welcome to stay, but you're also welcome to leave at this point. The fourth item on our agenda is consideration of 2 negative instruments. The first of these instruments is the Burial and Cremation Application and Registers Miscellaneous Amendment Scotland Regulations 2025. The purpose of the instrument is to amend the Burial Applications and Register Scotland Regulations 2025 and the Cremation Scotland Regulations 2019 to update the Burial and Cremation application forms and amend requirements of the Cremation Register. The instrument is also updates wording in the Burial Application Regulations to make it clearer. The Delegated Powers and Law Reform Committee considered the instrument at its meeting on the 9th of December, and the DPLR Committee drew Parliament's attention to inconsistencies related to forms associated with the regulations, specifically in relation to Form BF4, which did not contain an authorisation for burial section, in contrast to the current form BF4. The Scottish Government responded by stating that it was not intentional to remove Section 4, but the relevant regulations do not require that particular section to be completed, and it therefore has no operative legal effect. It also advised that Section 4 is currently completed by burial authorities as an administrative step, and such authorities will still need to take that step in the absence of Section 4 on the application form. The Scottish Government also indicated that it will set this out in guidance for the avoidance of any doubt. No motion to annul has so far been received in relation to this instrument. Do members have any comments they wish to put on record? I propose that the committee does not make any recommendations in relation to this negative instrument. Does any member disagree with this? And so can I confirm agreement? Thank you. The second instrument is the Common Services Agency Membership and Procedure Amendment Scotland Regulations 2025. The purpose of this instrument is to bring the Common Service Agency governance framework into line with the provisions applied to other health boards and special health boards by inserting updated provisions on resignation, suspension and disqualification into the Common Services Agency Membership and Procedure Regulations 1991 and to modernising the wording of these regulations. The Delegated Powers and Law Reform Committee considered the instrument at its meeting on the 16th of December 2025 and made no recommendations in relation to the instrument. No motion to annul has so far been received in relation to this instrument. Do members have any comments? I propose that the committee does not make any recommendations in relation to this negative instrument. Does any member disagree with this? No member disagrees, so I'll confirm agreement to that. At our next meeting on the 13th of January, the committee will undertake scrutiny of the Scottish Government's draft climate change plan, taking oral evidence from a panel of witnesses, and that concludes the public part of our meeting today.